In today's episode of HR Visionaries, we're going to speak to Shane from ClickUp. He will tell us a lot about how to start operations abroad, i.e. the Philippines. Stay tuned. Welcome to HR Visionaries, where we unlock the secrets of modern HR. I'm Benjamin, your host. Join us as we shed light on today's HR universe with HR leaders and innovators from across the globe. Whether you're an HR pro, a business leader, or just curious about the future of work, this is your shortcut to the forefront of HR innovation. Brought to you by Hire, the AI talent attraction platform. Welcome to our latest episode of HR Visionaries. I'm looking forward to my guest today. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
It's pretty awesome to speak to you. Can you give us a bit of a background? Who are you?
Yeah, so my name is Shane Noe. I am the VP of People Ops at ClickUp. I describe myself as a recovering finance guy who found his way over to HR. The story's pretty interesting how I got into it, but I've been in HR for about about half of my career, so almost 8 years.
When we spoke the first time, we violated the golden rule of this podcast not to talk too much about our own backgrounds in our first meeting, but we kind of had to, given we both are finance guys who found their passion for HR, right?
Yeah. It's funny, I find that some of the best people come from outside of HR. And so I'm seeing more and more, folks wanting to get into the space, which is really encouraging. Just in the last month, I've had two different folks trying to make the transition from finance to HR reach out to me on LinkedIn. So, it's been interesting.
Why do you think that is the case?
Well, I can tell you in my view, part of why I got into HR was early in my career. One of the big breaks in my career is coming out of school where I had studied finance. I got into Apple's. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in California, and it was funny. The CFO of Apple at the time was a Cal Poly alumni, and they had this rotational development program where they would take top finance grads from all these Ivy League schools and send them to different finance teams around the world for 2 years, like 3-month rotations. And the CFO said, "You have to go to my school and pick at least one person every year." So that year I was the person, and that was a huge break. I think I got to have 8 different jobs in the first 2 years. I got to work for 8 different bosses, which taught me a lot about how to be a good manager and how to avoid being a bad manager. But most importantly, it gave me perspective on the different functions. So I got to work in finance teams supporting sales, marketing, legal. I got a little bit of a bird's eye view of some of the different functions. And so later in my career, when I had an opportunity I'll just give you the short version. So following that program, I took a corporate finance role at Apple for about 2 years. It's funny. There's a horror stories about seeing Steve Jobs in the elevator. I never had that experience, but following that time oh yeah, they said that if you occasionally he'd ask somebody what they do, and if they didn't give a good enough answer, he might fire them on the spot. That's a rumor. I can't substantiate that, but yeah. So after that, I went to Google for what I thought was my dream job as a finance nerd. I got to work on their foreign exchange hedging team in the treasury. So I was trading options and derivatives with big banks in New York and handling something like $4 billion a month in nominal value. And it was awesome. It was very intellectually stimulating, but realized very quickly 2 things. One, I didn't want to be an FX guy for life. And 2, the culture on the team wasn't great. And so it made me realize how important culture was. My next stop was Box, and I joined their strategic planning and analysis team. I chose Box because the culture was fantastic, and that's where I got the first look at HR. About 2 years into my role there, the finance partner who was covering HR left or went on leave. I can't remember which one it was, and so I stepped in to cover for him. And what I saw on the HR side of the house was a team that had been dealing with hypergrowth, particularly with recruiting. And, they had scaled through the sheer force of will, they were keeping up, but they just didn't have a lot of the stuff you would expect from a modern function, the data, the capacity modeling, some of the processes. And so almost as a hobby, I started helping them out. We did like a hackathon where we built a Tableau dashboard, look at the pipeline. It got me thinking that there might be an opportunity in HR. Having seen how well other functions use data, HR seemed like it was pretty far behind, and I validated that by talking to some other folks in the industry. So when the opportunity came up, I guess about 3 or 4 months after doing that, the head of recruiting operations left, and they asked if I wanted to come over. I asked all my finance mentors, and every one of them told me not to go to HR.
What are you doing, mate?
Exactly right. You'll never get back into finance. And I agonized over that decision, and it turned out to be the best decision of my whole career. So that was the second big break. But yeah, from Box, jumped right into recruiting ops and analytics. That was a great chance to kind of learn the ropes and start to build some of the operational chops. Learned greenhouse, and through that I got to the opportunity to start knowledge sharing a little bit with folks in the industry. So through that speaking circuit, that I caught the attention of Brett Coyne at Okta, who was the SVP of recruiting, and he was tasked with tripling the size of the recruiting team over the next year. And he asked if I wanted to join. So went to Okta, helped him to build a phenomenal recruiting team. We tripled the size of the team and increased productivity by like 25% in that first year. But I think most interesting, at least to me, was Brett really understood how important data could be, and had created a data-driven culture in that team. And so really invested in creating the analytics, and I got to build up an analytics team. By probably the second year we were there, I'd argue that recruiting may have been the most sophisticated function at that company. We knew exactly what was going on with the org. We were able to forecast hires within 1% every time. We could tell them 2 months in advance what was going to happen over the next 2 months, and intervene if we saw problems. So it's almost like a weather forecaster. Like, we just had such a good handle on the business. There was an opportunity. From there, the chief people officer approached her about people analytics function, and I think the thought was like, hey, if we can do this for recruiting ops, like, can we do this for the people side of the house? And so funded me to build out the people analytics team. We stood up a workforce planning function, and then a few quarters after that, the head of people operations left, and they gave me the opportunity to take that role on. So I was in that role for, I want to say, about 1.5 years. And that was my first exposure to Manila and low-cost locations. So, really driving the tiered services approach, leveraging low-cost locations, using data to understand the business and to drive performance. And so, after I'd been at Okta for about 4 years when I was approached by ClickUp, and ClickUp asked if I wanted to come over, be the VP of People Ops. Pretty wide purview here. It's basically all of people except for talent development, recruiting, and the PBPs. Also, IT and facilities are in my org. But the first 6 months, they asked me to build up the Philippines presence. So worked on that, got that stood up, and the more that I've done this, the more I realize that there are some really common themes across operations that can be applied almost everywhere. The idea of tiered service, right? The idea of building a base of workers that are in lower cost geographies, identifying the type of work that they can excel at, and moving work down that pyramid, and then using data to understand how we're doing on the different KPIs, and monitor and intervene and coach and train. And so that's, if you'd asked me at the beginning of my career if I was going to wind up being an HR guy, I would have said there's no chance. And in hindsight, it's just been an awesome journey.
It sounds incredibly interesting, and I have so many follow-up questions there. First of all, I this switch from finance to HR. So you remember that so many people advised you against this, and nevertheless you pushed forward. I can share my story why I moved from finance into the HR space. I must say I found it incredibly interesting to help in the development of people. So you find a great talent that hasn't developed into like a senior person, but it's still very, very junior, but you see great potential. And well, I don't like these examples of turning some kind of mud into a diamond. I think it's pretty not very nice to say that about a person, but I think in general there's some truth in that. So you discover great people, and you also invest yourself into the development of those people. And when you, for example, find you elaborate on finding people on campuses and hire them, meet people at a very junior level and bring them to the next career step, that can be incredibly fulfilling and also can be very much a pioneering exercise.
Yeah, I completely agree. And if I put my finance hat on, the workforce is usually the biggest spend item, but it's somehow the one that gets the least scrutiny. But at the end of the day, a company is the people. And so if you can hire, retain, develop people, you are improving your company. One of my favorite quotes, I forget who said it, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. From the people. So it's also a lot more fun to work with HR folks than accountants.
Indeed, and as you said, so companies are people, and we're now looking at the trend for like the last 40 to 50 years, where we basically moved from what companies do is mainly manufacturing, and you need great machinery and people putting stuff together, towards now in also developed countries, services being like 70% of GDP, meaning you need advisors, you need bankers, you need accountants, you need developers, you need people who can provide for a great UX. Those are the people you need, and their ideas you definitely need as a company. And either you get the greatest people and flourish, or you don't.
Yeah, I think that's exactly on point.
So I was wondering, so for yourself, how did that journey then develop for you in terms of, there were obviously, as a finance guy, you know a lot about derivatives in FX, which is very different to what you need to know about, how to talk to people in difficult situations, about very important decisions they need to make, about labor law, about recruiting strategies. How did you gain all that knowledge then?
Yeah, so I think when folks ask me about switching careers, I tell them to think about their current skill set as a circle and the new job that they want as another circle. And so think of that as a Venn diagram, and find areas where that middle section is big enough to buy you the time to learn the rest of the circle. And so in the case of HR, I had a very good Excel skill set. You believe it or not, at the time I worked at Apple, finance was basically run on Excel. So I did a lot of Excel modeling.
I think not much has changed.
Yeah. Excel is a pretty good starter kit for bootstrapping an analytics team. I had to learn Tableau, enough of it to be dangerous, to at least direct it. But a lot of the skills I was able to take over was things like, we led the planning function at Box, and so I got to basically be a glorified scribe in the planning conversations and sit with the executive team as they were making these big decisions. And so the more exposure I got to these senior leaders, the more I learned how to make a business case, how to think about business problems. On the operations side, just through some of my own self-led learning and some of my own experiences, it was really thinking about first principles and sitting with the recruiters as they went through this process and identifying where they get a little bit pissed off and frustrated, like that's a friction point that we need to address. Doing the same with the people team in different functions. So there was enough of a overlap to where I could add some value immediately while learning all the other important skills that I needed to.
Well, before we get into HR analytics, which I'm super eager to talk about, I definitely need to ask you about your time in Manila and well, um, how how did you manage to well work in an environment you're not used to, well, working with people you don't know, working with regulations you don't know, and everything needs to go well, right?
Yeah. So believe it or not, I've never been to Manila. All of the work I've done with Manila has been from the other side of the world, which is pretty
Incredible.
amazing.
Yeah.
10 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah.
I'm overdue to go there. I have a young child at home. Otherwise, I probably already have spent some time over there. So in my first real exposure was at Okta, and at the time they already had a pretty small presence on the HR side. So the legal had already done a lot of the review. We were somewhat familiar with some of the regulations. We were using an employer of record company, and so they would kind of handhold us on a lot of this stuff. We grew the presence there about fivefold in the time that I was there. And it was really just a matter of learning. What's nice about that approach is I got to learn starting from a small presence and take those learnings and apply it to a bigger one. One of the functions we stood up at Okta was the workforce planning function, and the goal there was we had different conversations around location strategy happening in different teams. And I think that's common in a lot of companies is your global location strategy winds up being a product of the addition of all of your functional location strategies. And so really coming up with a analytical way of making these decisions. So we started by looking at the 35 top countries, and we looked at talent availability using LinkedIn Talent Insights. We looked at GDP per person as a early metric for like what these folks might actually cost. We later got the Radford data and actually layer that in, and you have to layer in benefits load for each country, which is different. So we did a lot of work in moving from 35 to 15 to 5 countries and bringing the functional leaders on that journey. So establishing a cross-functional group that is reviewing these and making this recommendation eventually to the E team. And I think what you find is the different low-cost locations have different pros and cons. In Manila, I'm partial to Manila. I really like the folks over there, and their talent set is growing every day. They have a really good educational team. A lot of companies are moving there. Manila is great for a lot of operational support work. At ClickUp, we're really trying to push the bar on what we can hire over there. So things like business intelligence or even outbound sales or software development we're looking at. But I would think of Manila as more of like the operational base. Then you look at a place like India, where they have a great set of talent around technical skills, but their own challenges, right? The Indian government, the interview process is pretty difficult. There are a lot of no-shows when you hire somebody over there because the competition for talent is really high, and it's a little bit more expensive than Manila, at least based on our numbers. And for places like go to market, there's some great talent in South America, Mexico, Costa Rica. You can find really good mid-level CSMs and account support reps there. So it's really understanding where is the talent, where are we going to get the best cost arbitrage, and then do we have buy-in from the leaders? That is the most important part. That probably was the most important part of having that tiger team of functional leaders was before you make the decision, you have to get the commitment that I will put headcount here. I think oftentimes folks will open up a location and say, all right, well, we did it. Who wants to hire here? And everybody kind of, have you seen that Homer Simpson gif where he kind of disappears into the bushes?
Exactly.
But really important to get alignment up front. The other thing I would say is the total reward strategy can be different by country. So For example, Poland is really, really popular right now. Also a great source of tech talent. I think the word is out on Poland. You've seen wages grow really fast there. I think most companies are probably surprised that there isn't more cost savings putting roles over in Poland now. But generally, they don't value equity for private companies as much as they do in the US. So you want to make sure that your compensation package is a little heavier weighted on cash there, so you can use your equity where it has the biggest impact. So, yeah. But your first question was around regulatory, and there isn't an easy answer for that. There are a few resources online where you can buy, PDFs of regulatory. I'm trying to remember the name of the one that I'm thinking of, but I think the right way to approach it is to do the analysis, narrow down to the list of countries, get some sense for regulatory issues, just red, yellow, green, and then do the due diligence before you make the final decision.
Well, it also sounds like you took a very analytical approach towards like what country we go to. Well, you mentioned like, okay, you started with 35 countries in the very beginning. You were looking at, and then well, you took the you created like a long list, a short list, and then you took it from there. How long did this process in the end take?
I would say we spent the better part of a quarter getting from the list of 35 down to the list of 3.
So quarter of a year.
Yeah, about 3 months, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. And well, and that process. So how can I kind of picture that process? Is it like, okay, you well, you're basically back in your role as a financial analyst, looking at different pros and cons, looking at KPIs.
Yeah.
Also probably lots of well, how can this country, or might this country head in the future to stuff like that, right? So lots of guesstimations, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, maybe I'll give you the step-by-step how to build a cohesive international strategy in 6 minutes.
Lovely.
Okay. So step 1, identify who is currently making the decisions or exerting the influence over the country strategy and start with them. Step 2, find other leaders of big people, heavy functions around the company and engage them in a regular meeting. You can call it like every 2 weeks, we're going to meet on international strategy. And the goal is to create the connective tissue so that we're all working off of the same playbook instead of these different functional international strategy. Step 3 is to create a list and start with all the countries that they already like. Most of the time, folks will already have a bunch of countries in mind, or they'll have heard about a competitor who's in a different country. Step 4 is purchase a LinkedIn Talent Insights license, or you can get this intelligence from other companies. I think Findem is another one that you can get this from. And take a look at the types of roles you would be hiring. So from those leaders, identify the roles that they would put in those locations. And then on LinkedIn, look for those roles and look for other countries that have a high prevalence of that talent. And that will help you to flesh out your initial list. So from there, you now have a sense of the 20 or 30 countries and the amount of talent for the roles that are relevant in each of those countries. Then you want to start pulling in some publicly available data. I mentioned a decent proxy for cost of labor is to look at GDP per capita. There's going to be some outliers there. Ireland, for example, because of their tax rules, has a ton of GDP, low capita. You will have to buy the Radford data sets when you start to narrow your list down. But that's one way to do it. The World Economic Forum also has some other information on on salaries. You want to look at things like the Global Corruption Index, right? How easy is it to do business over there? How friendly are the foreign business laws? How hard is it to set up an entity?
Right. So so when you started operations in a different country, so what were like your main concerns? So well, your task with this big strategic move, and if it doesn't work out, it's probably not that career enhancing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so I'll use the Philippines as an example. I think the first hesitation you get from leaders is the talent's not going to be as good over there. And so what you want is a couple of folks you can pilot this with and at least get a small presence. And then once they've stood it up and have a few people there and things are going well, now you have a little bit of credibility because that leader who's hesitating can talk to their leader who can tell them that it's going great. Also, just the interview process, have them actually meet some of these folks. That can help get over the hump a little bit. I think you have to make sure that the type of work you're giving them are things that they can be successful with. So in the case of operations, like it needs to be a process that doesn't have a lot of ambiguity. It needs to be documented well. You need to have a clear escalation path for when they hit a hurdle. Enablement's pretty important. When I've done this, I usually start, at least on the HR side, with what I call like a service catalog. So it's actually identifying all of the processes that we think we can move over there. And then, I'm an Excel, I think in Excel. So of course this is a Google sheet, right? With a link to the documentation or the screen capture. And so you start building this service catalog. You look at the number of times a month this item is ran and how much time it takes, so you can prioritize the really big time suck ones up front. And you start with a base of some of these things that seem pretty straightforward and are pretty time consuming, and then you build from there. And so once you've got this presence established, a lot of the work is going to the other leaders within HR and saying, hey, what is it that you're doing that we could do over there? Like, we've got limited headcount next year. For one US headcount, you can get 4 in Manila. Let my team help you identify some of these things that you could do. So the way that I phrase it is like, I'll go talk to their analysts and say, what part of your day are you kind of tuned out, listening to your headphones and doing something mindless? It's like, that's usually a good place to start building the catalog. So yeah, you build the catalog. Early success leads to later success. In the Philippines in particular, there were a few things I learned that you have to watch out for. One is companies and individuals will insinuate that they can do stuff that they can't. They fake it till you make it is bigger over there. And so you need to make sure you have a technical component of your interviews. When selecting an EOR, maybe I should talk a little bit about that too. When you go to a new country, you don't start by just setting up an entity, typically. You usually start by collaborating with an employer of record, also known as a professional employment organization. So there's a few big ones. DL is one of the big ones. Remote is one of the big ones. And in country, there are certain ones. So in Manila, there's quite a few of them. And they will help you. Usually, they'll help you to recruit people, and then they will payroll them. Handle benefits, taxes, all the stuff that you need a back office for. They will do for you for a monthly fee. What I found is, especially with the talent bar that we have in tech, the hardest part is the recruiting. The recruiters at these EOR folks are used to filling volume roles, and so one of the early investments, if you want to go big, is to actually hire your own recruiter there. And so I would say that's probably one of the big risks up front is making hiring mistakes. Because at that first, 10, 15 people level, if you have 1 or 2 mishires, it doesn't help your case. So yeah, that's sort of how you get started. And then it's honestly, the scariest part is just starting. Once you get going, you see that things start to pay off. The team gets it. I think a lot of companies, there are ways to manage a transition to offshore that are really bad, and there are ways that are actually really good. The best way to manage a transition is to do it through expansion. So I have a team of 4 recruiting coordinators who are based in the US, and I've identified that as a job that can be done in Manila. The best way to do it is to say, all right, next year's recruiting coordinators, we're going to put in Manila, and maybe we hire 8 of them. We're going to give our best US-based recruiting coordinator a chance to manage those folks. Depending on how fast you're growing, all of the folks in America might get a chance to manage those folks. That's the best way to do it. The worst way to do it is to say, uh-oh, we want to try to save money. Let's terminate these 4 US folks and then hire, um, 4 folks in Manila. And then there's all different, there's a whole spectrum, right? So you might keep your top performers and manage out your lower ones. But yeah, I think you don't want to do this in a knee-jerky reaction. It needs to be telegraphed and messaged. And the more you can provide opportunities for your existing employees, the more they're going to support the transition and make it successful.
So I think it's a super important point you raise. So like how to communicate this with the staff in America that then perhaps feels like cheaper competition and well against the salaries you mentioned is obviously impossible to compete, right? So therefore, how do you communicate that then over here?
Yeah, well, hopefully you're doing it through the expansion. And so it's communicated as an opportunity, right? An opportunity to maybe manage, to bring in lower level folks who can, maybe you make them seniors and the new ones are juniors. You definitely want to have an internal mobility program. And so that there's opportunity if something is happening to their role, they have an opportunity to find something else within the company. You want to make sure that in the cases that you do have to let go of people, that you treat them right, severance package, plenty of notice, to the extent as possible, and helping them to find other roles, whether in the company or outside of the company. I think the worst thing you can do is be really secretive about it. So, a lot of companies are having this, Facebook calls it their year of efficiency. But I think if there's one word on everybody's goals this year, at least in tech, it is efficiency. And so, your finance team can make a great case for why we're trying to do this, drive shareholder value. Your stock will perform better as a result. And part of that means like finding places with lower cost of labor that we can leverage and doing so in a way that, provides a lot of opportunity for the folks on shore.
Right, amazing. Well, Jean, I definitely need to ask you a few questions around analytics and HR. So since we got carried away a bit, because I think it's absolutely fascinating topic. So to start operations in Manila, for example. But on HR analytics, so I think it's actually quite fascinating what's happening or what has been happening over the last few years. So that you had like HR organizations looking very much at numbers, increasing efficiency, making sure, hey, how can we validate that we hire the right people, that we get the right people in interviews, that we will retain the talents we want to retain, that we put some numbers on it. So how have you experienced that kind of development?
Yeah. So I would say, generally speaking, most HR folks did not perform well in math in high school. And so I think there's a lot of fear when it comes to data. And I think it's because people associate data with math. Data isn't math. Data is just observations, right? Looking at a dashboard is different than asking someone to do a square root calculation. So I think a lot of you have to bridge the gap between where the HR folks are and where your business intelligence team is. I think a lot of times what I see is a great business intelligence team will put together a super awesome, fancy looking dashboard that would be perfect for an engineering leader. And they give it to the HR team and their eyes glaze over and they start to get scared. And so, the way I like to think about it is, monitoring data in real time is something we do all the time. Like if you think about driving a car, right? You've got a dashboard that has your fuel gauge, your RPMs, your speed, and you're monitoring this in real time, driving 70 miles an hour. The stakes are incredibly high, way higher than at work, right? When you're on the freeway and you don't think twice about it. You just know. You have a feeling for where you are in those 3 KPIs. So I think it's really important to start really simple. Identify those 3 KPIs that you need to have a constant awareness of, and then build the reporting so that you can see it. When you start to do that, then you start small and they realize, hey, actually, this is great. Like I've got visibility. I can see the trend line. I know if we're going up or down. They start to build confidence, and then you can start to add, some of the other stuff.
What is your feeling about tech becoming, or technology in general becoming much more relevant for HR departments, not just with like HR techs or like the big HR technology providers becoming more and more innovative, but well, obviously with the rise of AI, it opens completely new worlds or universes, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two schools of thought here, right? There's the doomsday scenario that we're all going to lose our jobs, and there's the more like egalitarian scenario where new jobs spring up and we find a right balance and people are still needed. The real answer is probably going to be somewhere in the middle of those two. AI and HR, I would say, I've seen so much momentum on different AI solutions for HR. HR is a really great use case for AI. It's very complicated and there's a lot of factors. These large language models have trillions of factors to produce results. A person, has a few hundred factors to determine what their results are going to be. So it's I can see why there's so much interest in it. And in fact, I've talked to two different companies in the last 2 weeks who are working on very early stage products to monitor employee performance and deliver feedback. And the way I think about it is it's pretty scary. And if you remember, I'm dating myself, but when Google first came out, the search engine was a big deal. And one of their very public MOs was, our company value is do no evil. And so it felt like they were the good guys, and it made you be able to trust the technology a little bit better. When it comes to things like monitoring employee performance, we need to make sure that the folks who win are the good guys, because there is a really bad way to do this, and then there's a much better way to do it. I think that the lazy tendency is to monitor inputs. So to look at how many hours a day a person was moving their mouse, right? Or how many emails did they send? The harder and better way to do it is to look at outputs. Like, what was your goal achievement? I'm not even going to attempt to list some of these other things these guys are working on, but and then how do you deliver this feedback? Like, I think transparency is really important. The employee should know how they're doing on these things at all times, and they should get recommendations on how to improve those things. So that's what I would like to see. Is I would like to see the do no evil folks win this race and come out with something that is not just good for managers, but actually good for ICs and can help them to get better.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very great ending statement. So I really like that idea. Well, I totally agree with you. I think it's about, well, AI cooperating with humans in making everyone better, more productive, being less bothered with like annoying work, but focusing much more on the stuff you like, and well, obviously work on improvements for yourself. So that's very cool indeed.
Yeah. Well, Benjamin, thank you so much for having me. This has been fantastic. Yeah, looking forward to seeing your next guests.
Awesome. Well, I have one last question for you, and that is a new category we introduced. So, what would be your what would be a question you would put to another HR leader that will appear in one of our next podcasts?
Oh, I've got a great one. I asked this of all of the people analytics leads that I meet. What was the most impactful analysis that was run on your workforce that drove the most action? If there is one study or set of analytics that you did that had the biggest impact of the company, what was that? Because I think if you could get the answer to that question from a lot of different CPOs, it would give a lot of people a lot of great ideas.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And looking forward to our next podcast then.
Thank you, Benjamin. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. And well, all of you guys, thanks for listening in. Sure, it was super interesting. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. See you next time.